Hello. Depending on what time of day you are viewing this recording, Ohayo gozaimasu, konnichiwa, or konbanwa. It is our pleasure to participate remotely in the 2025 Global Business Anthropology Summit being held in Tokyo at Chuo University. We extend our deepest gratitude and appreciation to the conference committee for permitting the recorded presentation of our salon focused on myths and Afro-descendant representation across Japanese and Chinese marketing communications, the realities of African and African diaspora representation in arts marketing communications. Welcome. We hope you will enjoy our session and find it to be informative. Today, we will share initial findings from our research, Myths and Afro-Descendant Representation across Japanese and Chinese marketing communications, the realities of African and African diaspora representation in arts marketing communications. This research seeks to create heightened awareness, understanding, and consideration pertaining to the global significance and influence of racialized myths across business and society created by marketing communications depicting Afro-descendants in Japan and China. Through this research, we hope to promote an increased awareness and sensitivity among anthropologists and business leaders regarding the cultural legacy of racialized myths and marketing materials. Our research strives to address 5 key questions. Today's session will focus on the observations pertaining to 2 of these questions. Those questions are: 1, what themes emerge as myths regarding Afro-descendants in marketing communications across the Japanese and Chinese business landscapes? 2, how to relate racialized myths and Blackness in Japanese and Chinese marketing communications relate to observed cultural dynamics. The other third, fourth, and fifth questions being addressed by this body of research are: 3, how have Africa and the African diaspora influenced artistic representations of Afro-descendants in Japanese and Chinese mediascapes? 4, how do the mythological, quote, narratives of other, end quote, affect members of the African diaspora exposed to Chinese and Japanese marketing communications? And 5, what are alternative arts-based representations of Afro-descendants for consideration in the development of Chinese and Japanese marketing communications? It is our very sincere hope that this salon will foster heightened cross-cultural understanding and support the creation of engaging marketing communications and persuasive advertising that are free from harmful myths regarding Afro-descendants. Before we dive into the research, we will take a few moments for introductions.
Founded in 1867, Howard University is a private historically Black research university comprised of 14 schools and colleges. At Howard University, students pursue 143 programs of study, leading to undergraduate, graduate, and professional degrees. Howard University is the most highly ranked co-ed institution among historically Black colleges and universities. Proud of its #1 ranking, Howard also produces more on-campus African American PhD recipients than any other university in the United States. Known as, quote, a beacon point, the Mecca for the entire Black diaspora around the world, end quote, Howard University is the place where students and faculty from over 70 countries convene with a commitment to excellence in truth and service.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. I am Professor Autumn McDonald. I am a market researcher and anthropologist with more than 2 decades of experience in research, marketing, insights, and analytics, leading research programs on over 80 brands and across 6 continents. I earned a Master of Science in Applied Anthropology from the University of North Texas, and I teach multidisciplinary business courses as a faculty member in the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts at Howard University. My scholarly focus as an anthropologist is intersections of race, space, and ethnicity.
Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Clark Randolph, and I'm both a researcher and a musician. I earned my Bachelor of Music in Music History with a minor in violin performance from Howard University, and later completed a Master of Science in Performance Science at the Royal College of Music in London. Currently, I teach music courses at Howard University and the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts. In addition to my academic work, I also perform regularly as a violinist in my family's ensemble, Randolph Strings. My work sits at the intersection of performance, research, and education, with a focus on exploring the connections between music, culture, and the identities of Afro descendant communities.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Jackson, and I just recently graduated from Howard University, earning my Bachelor of Music in Music Business with a minor in classical voice. This fall, I will be at University of Maryland pursuing my Master of Arts in Musicology, and today I'm really excited to present and share our research with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josie Murphy. I'm a recent graduate of Howard University, where I earned my Bachelor of Business Administration and Business Management with a minor in sociology. I was previously a 2024 Fulbright Hays Scholar, where I conducted international research exploring the intersections of culture and urbanization in South Africa. In the future, I plan to pursue a PhD in sociology to advance research that guides inclusive and equitable business practices. We would love to learn a bit about you as well, so if you would like to reach out to any of us via our LinkedIn or our university email.
Thank you, Josie, for encouraging viewers interested in the work to contact us. Our team is utilizing a mixed methods approach to examine representational myths of Afro descendants that are reflected in Japanese and Chinese marketing communications. Our research is paying particular attention to television ads, out of home advertising, print communication, and social media branded ads. The work combines literature review findings, descriptive coding of over 40 pieces of marketing communications, and autoethnographic observations to identify dominant mythologies and understand their impact on viewing constituents. We have now completed the first 4 phases of the research. These first 4 phases involved the evaluation of 48 pieces of marketing communications that ran in China and Japan during the 36-year period ranging from 1989 to 2025. Also, 71 sources have been included in the literature review. In addition, Otter, Delve, MS Teams, DeepSeek, and ChatGPT have been technological enablers with this research. Importantly, we have conducted this work with an awareness of the historical context that includes understanding 1, that trade between China and Africa began during the Ming Dynasty. 2, Africans first visited Japan during the Sengoku period. 3, some perceive current investment in Africa by the Chinese as neocolonialism. And 4, the number of immigrants in Japan rose from 851,000 in 1985 to more than 3.4 million in 2023. This can be challenging in a country that has long defined itself in part by its perceived or claimed homogeneity. Importantly, we believe that when completed, this research will be useful in comprehending the associated cultural worlds reflected in and created by the studied marketing communications. As explained by University of Michigan professor Dr. Marcus Collins, advertising is, quote, what scholars would call a cultural product, the tangible or intangible creations that reflect the shared perspectives of a group of people, end quote. And according to anthropologists Dr. Tim Malafite and Dr. Brian Moran, quote, if anthropologists write culture, advertising produces it, end quote.
The first myth that we are going to discuss today is the myth of respectability in China. In the context of Chinese perceptions, particularly among Han constituents, this refers to the belief that African Americans are inherently deserving of esteem, honor, and dignity. The term African American refers to individuals who are descendants of the kidnapped Africans brought to the United States. This may seem like a positive or even affirming view, but upon our exploration of this myth, we will see how such a belief can still be shaped by stereotypes, limited exposure, and/or conditional acceptance. In Chinese marketing communications and society, Afro descendants, specifically African Americans, often receive respect when they're seen as good foreigners. That is, when they embody racialized talents like musical ability or athleticism. This reinforces the myth of respectability, where respect is given based on perceived race-linked capabilities. For example, Dr. Marquettes Presswood, professor at Temple University, Kyoto, explains how African American musicians influence Chinese modernity. But even that influence is filtered through racialized expectations. So while China promotes racial harmony rhetorically, Black individuals still have to perform respectability to avoid being seen as disruptive, as the Human Rights Watch points out. Ultimately, those who fit within these narrow frameworks are labeled cultured and safe, highlighting how admiration can coexist with deeper forms of racialization. As supported by the research of Robert Castillo, professor in cultural studies at Lingnan University in Hong Kong, Afro-descendant individuals who embody what's perceived as acceptable Blackness, such as successful athletes or entertainers, are often elevated in the media. This selective representation helps support marketing and commodification efforts, where African American bodies are celebrated, but only within narrow marketable roles. However, this public admiration doesn't always translate into broader social acceptance or respect. The quote here from a 2020 post on Hupu, a popular Chinese sports forum, captures that contradiction. I admire NBA players and like watching the NBA, but this does not change the fact that I am annoyed by the Blacks living in China. This kind of comment shows the contradictory tension between fascination and rejection. It points to a conditional respect, one that separates celebrated Black figures from everyday Black people and reinforces stereotypes rather than dismantling them. This slide highlights how cultural acceptance in China is often tied to conformism. This example from journalists Steffi Chung and Hassan Tayer highlights how global pop icon Rihanna, an Afro-descendant with significant ties to the US because of her career, was embraced in China after her hit We Found Love was phonetically interpreted as Weifang Dai, or Love of Weifang, a city in Shandong province. She was even nicknamed the Queen of Shandong. This somewhat innocent moment displays how Blacks are embraced when they can be localized or aligned with Chinese cultural references. Rihanna's now perceived love for Weifang was read as an expression of loyalty to China. But for everyday Afro-descendants, as researchers Lon and Peterson point out, Acceptance often depends on conforming to Confucian ideals, in this case, love and loyalty to China and its sovereign and social structure. Afro descendants who align with these values are more readily accepted, while those who don't face exclusion and marginalization. Rihanna became acceptable not just because of her racialized talent, but as someone whose image could be framed within Chinese national values. This reinforces the myth of respectability. Black individuals are embraced when their presence can be folded into dominant narratives, often in racialized ways. It's not just about talent or fame. It's about how that talent is read, interpreted, and framed within a specific socio-political context. Stephon Marbury is a prime example of how respectability operates in the Chinese sports and media landscape. His success in the Chinese Basketball Association wasn't only due to his performance on the court, but it was deeply tied to his perceived loyalty to China. In McLeod's 2015 reporting, we see how this image was carefully shaped. Marbury was known for being scandal-free, for mastering a few Chinese swear words, for using chopsticks, and for publicly sporting an I Love China tattoo. He became a symbol of cultural conformism, and that made him deeply respected. One young fan even called him the spirit of Beijing, which tells us just how powerfully he was embraced, not just as an athlete, but as a cultural figure. This celebration reflects a recurring pattern. Black individuals are most accepted in China when they embody what are seen as positive traits, and when they demonstrate loyalty, humility, and alignment with Chinese cultural values. Marbury, in this context, became the ultimate example of the respectable Black athlete. As we analyze the previous branded communication examples, a clear and recurring cycle emerges, illustrated on this slide. This cycle often begins with either intentional or perceived conformism, the act of aligning one's behavior, values, or image with dominant social or political norms. For instance, Stephon Marbury displayed intentional conformism when he got an I Love China tattoo and actively engaged with Chinese cultural practices. In contrast, Rihanna's case reflects perceived conformism. Her lyrics in We Found Love were phonetically misheard as Weifang Dai, or Love of Weifang, and interpreted as an expression of loyalty to China. In both cases, certain behaviors, whether deliberate or misinterpreted, were quickly framed as aligning with Chinese ideals. As a result, aspects of the individual that fall outside of these norms are minimized or erased, while the parts that are seen as acceptable are amplified. This selective perception leads to heightened admiration and respect, not necessarily for the individual's full identity, but for the version of them that fits comfortably within dominant cultural expectations in China.
The next myth we will discuss are the themes filth and lack of hygiene in China, which is defined by the erroneous belief among Han constituents in China that Africans are unclean, dirty, and/or have a higher propensity to spread disease. Journalist Jia Yangfan writes, "Here's an origin story that's unlikely familiar to Western theologians, but I was told in kindergarten in the city of Chongqing. A long time ago, God decided to put intelligent creatures on earth. How would he make them? Over a heavenly fire, naturally. But God was so eager to examine his creations that he removed them from the heat too hastily. The first batch was therefore undercooked, pale of color, and pasty of meat. He made a second batch and left it in longer, but was dismayed to find that he had overcompensated. The figures were burnt a dark brown, which was not at all what he had intended. God resolved and tried a third and last time, having learned from the failed experiments of his first and second efforts. This time the figures were colored honey gold, neither blanched nor burnt. Ah, God cried in delight. Perfection. This is how the Chinese were made, our kindergarten teacher said. At first glance, it might seem like a playful origin story, but the deeper message is harmful. This story doesn't just position lighter skin as ideal, it portrays darker skin as the result of failure, something overdone, dirty, or impure. In many interpretations, being burnt becomes a metaphor for filth or lack of hygiene. Stories like this teach children at a young age that Afro descendant futures, especially darker skin, are not just different, they are wrong, even shameful. This is how anti Blackness gets encoded early, through what seems like innocent storytelling, and these early narratives shape perceptions that continue into adult and across generations. Shanghai-based writer and editor Nisha Davis highlights how both Chinese and Western media have played a role in shaping a harmful and narrow narrative about Africa and its people. These outlets often portray the continent as a place defined by poverty, disease, and backwardness, a place that needs saving rather than understanding or partnership. This kind of framing strips the African diaspora of their agency and reinforces the stereotypes that influence not just public perception, but also foreign policy, brand communication, and interpersonal attitudes. These narratives can be deeply damaging, contributing to social stigma, discrimination, and internalized shame. Black skin, and therefore Africans, are viewed as undesirable by Han Chinese. Marketing and study communication play a major role in reinforcing this. Through ads, media coverage, and public messaging, Africans are often portrayed as dirty, linking dark skin to filth and poor hygiene. That perception then escalates. Africans are then seen as diseased, often portrayed as unclean and subtle but persistent ways across communication platforms. Ultimately, this leads to dehumanization. When a group is consistently framed this way, it becomes easier to strip them of empathy and justify unequal treatments. As journalist Zhang Jie notes, this form of racial discrimination is widespread and institutional. Even if many choose not to acknowledge it, these narratives aren't accidental. They are maintained through repeated messaging that shapes public perception over time. A Chinese detergent commercial ignited international outrage. The advertisement, produced by the Chinese company Shanghai Lesheng Cosmetics, features a young Black man speared with paint approaching an attractive Chinese woman, grinning and winking, only to have her pop a laundry detergent pod into his mouth and then shove him into a washing machine. After a short cycle, a creamy complexioned Chinese man emerges, smiling, evidently to the woman's delight.
改变只需一颗俏皮洗衣溶珠。俏皮全国招商热线400-800-5086。
Negative perceptions of Black skin extend to create perceptions of Africans as being diseased. As a recent migrant minority community in China, the Black community's experience has been defined by vulgar racism, exploitation, and stigmatization. The Black community in China was again a target of multiple racial projects, which sought to label their bodies as diseased and physical presence as a threat to the viability and safety of the Han majority. As you see described by former journalist Zhang Jie, Africans are viewed by Chinese as being dirty and as having diseases, a perception that is associated with beliefs regarding, quote, the level of sociocultural development of civilization, end quote. He also states that African, quotes, were once again associated with the spread of a disease because of their perceived sociocultural characteristics, uncivilized, unruly, unhygienic, and of low quality, end quote. We see this progression described by Dr. Anwar Osini. Quote, the Black community in China was again a target of multiple racial projects which sought to label their bodies as diseased and physical presence as a threat to the viability and safety of the Han majority, end quote. News article Al Jazeera also highlighted, quote, African students and expatriates in China are reportedly being evicted from their homes and mistreated over fears they could spread the novel coronavirus, end quote. Huobi's ad reflects systemic racism in China as its drama positions Africanness as the other, erases the humanity of African constituents, and perpetuates the notion that filthy and unhygienic Black bodies serve as suitable targets for inhumane treatment.
So the next myth we will explore is the myth of pleasure and hypersexuality in Japan. This joint myth refers to the perception of Black individuals across the diaspora as providers of fulfillment and enjoyment in both non-sexual and sexual ways. Afro descendants have historically been linked to being a source of pleasure for the Japanese. This is evidenced in this quote, noting early exchanges between Japanese and African people. Pleasure showed up in our data codes under the societal role titled Invitation to Pleasure. The marketing communications that we analyzed focus on non-sexual pleasure, often utilized Afro-descendants to sell food items, such as the Bob Sapp pizza commercial or the James Brown Nissan commercial for noodles. Let's take a look. Pleasure can expand beyond the food realm, evidenced by Whitney Houston in the Sanyo electronic TV commercial screen caps at the bottom right as well. Across these different industries, the Black individuals lean into showcasing a sensory experience with the audience, whether through excitement for taste, sound, or through other sensory markers, all emphasizing pleasure. As a facet of pleasure, Afro-descendants were also heavily depicted as purveyors of sexual pleasure through hypersexuality in the marketing communications that we analyzed. In the marketing communications contained in the research sample, we found that hypersexuality often showed up in magazine covers. On the 1991 Studio Voice magazine cover, for example, the Black male physique is naked, shiny, and put on full display. On the Vogue Japan cover, with Nicki Minaj to the left, she gestures to her crotch area seductively, the sexual undertones evident. In all these marketing communications, the Afro-descendants are depicted with sexual tones, thus leaning further into the myth that Blackness embodies sexual activity. Existing literature supports that Blackness, as related to Japan, is often depicted with pleasure or sexuality in mind. Blacks in marketing materials are often portrayed as sexual objects or with sexual fetish. So two interesting social dynamics emerge as a result of this joint myth. The first being that the depiction of Blacks as pleasure providers feeds a perception of unseriousness of Afro-descendants. Japanese sociology blogger Yuya Kiori notes this, explaining that Black celebrities are not taken seriously due to their role of amplifying pleasure. As for the second dynamic, with modern Japanese sexual philosophy lying more in a fantasy space than reality, evidenced by the high levels of sexual inexperience, high use of commercial sex work paired with the culture's overall hypersexualization of women, depictions of Afro descendants further play into this idealized sexual desire. Finally, with 12 ads tied to pleasure or hypersexuality in Japan, a total of 37.5% of the marketing materials analyzed featured this joint myth, indicating a prevalence of this myth in Japanese society.
While our research has so far identified over 8 myths, the last and final myth we will cover today is the myth of cultural erosion. According to Dr. Michael Prieler, a scholar whose research focuses on East Asian media, quote, Japan has tended to see itself as a homogeneous country. Representations of Afro descendants in marketing communications therefore include myths of cultural erosion. In fact, the Osaka Prefecture Police have depicted the presence of Black people as representing a threat to cultural values and acceptable community behaviors in their print communication. Dr. Prieler also explains, quote, the representation of others constructs Japaneseness by creating difference and highlighting boundaries. By showing the characteristics of others, Japanese TV ads reveal how Japanese define themselves. End quote. Along those lines, Nike's video ad highlights the notion that the presence of Blackness diminishes one's belonging to Japanese culture. Let's take a look at the ad.
時々考えるんだ。私って何者？できることなんてあるの？私、期待外れなのかな？普通じゃないのかな？このままでいいのかな？全部無視できたらいいのに。私、浮いてる？もっと馴染んだ方がいいのかな？これ見ちゃダメなの？みんな注目。今日も転校生を紹介します。みんなに好かれなきゃ。我慢しなきゃ。気にしないふりしなきゃ。こんなこと失礼しないで。今までずっとそうだった。それが当たり前だって思ってた。でも、そんなことないかも。ないね。ないでしょ。ありえない。いつか誰もが俺のままに生きられる世界になるって。でも、そんなの待ってられないよ。
In a similar vein, Kieran's 2016 campaign, Greeting the Matcha, provides another example which depicts Blackness and Afro descendants as being un-Japanese and outside the bounds of Japanese culture and rituals, as the drama focuses on, quote, a Japanese man having trouble with a too friendly greeting by a foreigner, end quote. The foreigner is a Black man. Importantly, we see that the literature aligns with this fourth myth found in our study of Japanese marketing communications. And the supporting literature can be arranged under 5 relevant pillars. 1, homogeneity and pride. 2, the belief that culture is synonymous with race. 3, conformity as a value. 4, the idea that Blackness reduces an individual. And 5, the fear that diversity erodes Japanese culture. And one cannot reflect upon the myth of cultural erosion apparent in Japanese marketing communications without considering societal and cultural dynamics pertaining to representation. We see that 20 of the OECD countries collect no racial or ethnic identity data. One of these nations is Japan. Meanwhile, the number of immigrants in Japan has risen significantly in recent decades. Unfortunately, quote, how Blacks or African Americans are seen in Japan, the majority of it is kind of bad, end quote. However, according to Travel Noir, despite these dynamics, quote, a vibrant and growing Black community is thriving, blending the richness of African diasporic heritage with Japanese customs and innovations, end quotes. Afro descendants are indeed present in Japanese marketing communications. That said, 15.6% of the Japanese marketing communications coded in our study reflect the myth of cultural erosion. In summary, through our new research, we're developing novel frameworks and theories. These include a new model of erasure, an adapted field of racial positions, and a conceptualization of Sino-saviorism.
As next steps, we are now preparing to enter the autoethnographic phase of our research, which will then be followed by an arts-based analysis. If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Links to our LinkedIn pages have been provided in the description box for your reference. We sincerely thank everyone for joining us today for this meaningful dialogue. We would like to thank individuals at Howard University, including Department of Music Chair Carol Dashio, Interim Fine Arts Dean Gwendolyn Everett, and Provost Anthony Wuta for their encouragement in our research endeavors. We would like to extend a special thank you to GBAS in making this conference and our participation possible, and for providing a space fueling inspiration, innovation, and empowerment for the future.